The mail-order husband arrived to find nothing but ash and bone-dry earth where a ranch should have stood. Ezekiel Thornfield stepped down from the dusty stagecoach, his weathered hands gripping a worn leather satchel that held everything he owned. Smoke still curled from blackened timber like the dying breath of something that had fought too hard to live. This was supposed to be his wedding day. A woman knelt in the ruins, her calloused fingers sifting through charred debris. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, streaked with soot and sweat. She wore men's work clothes, practical and torn. A boy crouched beside her, maybe 8 years old, with bronze skin and watchful eyes that tracked Zeke's every movement. The woman looked up. Her face was angular, marked by sun and hardship, with high cheekbones that spoke of mixed blood. This was not the gentle schoolmarm named Mary who had written him letters about pressed flowers and Sunday sermons. "You're the one from the letters." Her voice carried no shame, only exhaustion. Zeke set down his satchel. The boy moved closer to his mother, protective instincts already carved deep despite his youth. "I'm Seraphina Redhawk McAllister, not Mary." She stood, brushing ash from her hands. "Mary was my sister. She died of fever 2 winters past." The admission hung in the smoke-thick air. Zeke studied her face, seeing the resemblance now. The same eyes from the daguerreotype, but harder, more alive. "I wrote those letters. Used her name because no man answers a half-breed widow with a child." She lifted her chin. "Especially not when she needs help this badly." Zeke pulled off his hat, running fingers through graying hair. The boy whispered something in Apache. His mother answered in the same tongue, her voice softer than it had been in English. "This is little Wolf," she said, "my son." The ruins stretched around them like broken teeth. What had been a main house was now foundation stones and scattered timber. Corrals had been reduced to fence posts standing like grave markers. Even the well had been fouled, green scum floating on its surface. What happened here? Cornelius Blackwood happened. Sarah's jaw tightened. Cattle baron from town. Says my husband owed him money from cards. Came 3 days ago with his men. Gave me time to get out, then burned the rest. Zeke surveyed the destruction. Too thorough for a simple debt collection. Too personal. How much did your husband owe? $500. Might as well be 5,000. She kicked at a piece of charred wood. Banknote comes due in 6 weeks. Without buildings, without stock, I got nothing to sell but dirt. Little Wolf found something in the ash. A tin cup, dented but whole. He showed it to his mother with quiet pride. She touched his shoulder, a gesture so gentle it spoke of deeper tenderness beneath her hard exterior. Zeke knew he should walk away, climb back on that stagecoach and find himself a different life. The woman had lied to him, drawn him into someone else's war. But something in her stillness reminded him of another woman, another time when he had walked away from someone who needed him. "I'm not the man from my letters either." The words came out rougher than intended. "Told you I was a successful businessman. Truth is, I'm a carpenter. Former Union soldier who lost his family to typhoid while I was playing war." Sarah studied his face, searching for the lie beneath the lie. "Been drifting since the surrender. Taking work where I can find it. Got your letters forwarded from 3 different towns." He gestured at the ruins. "This why you needed a husband. For the labor, needed someone to help rebuild. To stand with us when Blackwood comes back." Her honesty cut clean as a blade. "Won't pretend it was about love. Couldn't afford that luxury." The boy found another treasure in the ash. A horseshoe nail, bent but usable. He pocketed it with the same care another child might show a silver dollar. Zeke looked at the mountains rising beyond the destroyed ranch. Purple shadows gathered in their folds, promising winter weather. The woman and her son would never survive the cold season without shelter. Even if they could, Blackwood would be back to make sure they didn't see spring. 6 weeks till the banknote comes due. 6 weeks. That's enough time to build something. Not what was here before, but something. He picked up a piece of unburned timber, testing its weight. Assuming we can keep Blackwood from burning it down again. Sarah's eyes narrowed. We? Partnership, not marriage. You need someone who knows construction. I need a place to winter over. He met her gaze directly. Honest work for honest shelter. Split whatever profits come from the land. She considered this, her hand resting on her son's shoulder. Little Wolf whispered something in Apache. She nodded. He wants to know if you'll teach him to use tools properly. His father started before he died, but never. Finished. I can do that. Then we have a deal. She extended her hand, palm lined with calluses and old scars. Partners. They shook on it while standing in the ashes of someone else's hopes. Two people who had bent truth into honesty, gambling. Their futures on 6 weeks, and whatever strength they could find in each other. The mountains watched, impassive as always. Winter was coming whether they were ready or not. The first week, they worked in silence broken only by the ring of hammer on nail. Zeke's hands remembered skills the war had tried to bury. Sarah knew where the desert kept its secrets, which plants held water, how to read the wind for weather, where the good clay lay hidden beneath alkali dust. Little Wolf proved himself useful in ways that surprised them both. His small fingers could thread rope through spaces too narrow for adult hands. He sorted nails by size, arranged tools by function, carried water without spilling a drop. The boy listened more than he spoke, absorbing lessons in English and carpentry with equal attention. They raised the frame of a modest house on the stone foundation that had survived the fire. Nothing fancy. 4 rooms and a kitchen, built to stand against wind and weather. Sarah showed Zeke how Apache builders reinforced corners with specific knots. He taught her which woods would bend without breaking. By the second week, the rhythm felt natural. Zeke would wake before dawn to start the fire. Sarah would emerge from the lean-to shelter they had built first, her hair braided for work. Her movements economical as winter light. Little Wolf appeared when the coffee was ready, carrying whatever tools they would need that day. The boy had taken to following Zeke during the carpentry lessons. His father had started teaching him before. The fever took hold, but the knowledge was incomplete. Fragmented. Zeke filled in the gaps with patience that surprised everyone, including himself. Your papa taught you to measure twice, cut once, Zeke said, watching Little Wolf mark a board with careful precision. Good lesson. Saved wood is saved time. The boy nodded, his face serious with concentration. He spoke English well but chose his words carefully, each one weighed before release. During the long afternoon hours, while Zeke worked on roof beams and Sarah repaired what remained of the fencing, stories emerged in fragments. Sarah's mother had been Apache, cast out by her people for loving a white trader. The trader had abandoned them both when the Apache Wars made mixed families dangerous. Sarah had married McAllister not for love but for protection. A decent man who needed a wife. A woman who needed a name that would keep her son safe. They had built something peaceful here, something that felt permanent enough to believe in. He never asked about Little Wolf's real father, she said one evening as they shared beans and cornbread around the fire. Just claimed the boy as his own from the first day. Zeke studied the flames, seeing other fires from other times. Good man then, good enough. She looked at her son, already asleep in his blankets. Better than most would have been. Zeke's own story came in smaller pieces. A wife named Catherine who had laughed at his attempts to grow flowers in Missouri clay. Twin daughters who had inherited her laugh and his stubborn streak. The sickness had taken them while he was fighting at Antietam, believing he was protecting something that was already gone. Came home to 3 losses and a note from the neighbor. Woman, he said. Couldn't stay after that. Sold everything and started walking. The fire crackled between them, consuming wood that would become ash, that would feed the earth, that would grow new things. The cycle continued whether people were ready or not. By the third week, the house had walls and a roof that would shed rain. They moved their sleeping quarters inside, though they kept separate spaces. Partners, not spouses. The distinction mattered to both of them, though neither examined why too closely. That was when Dutch Morrison came calling. He rode up on a sorrel mare, his hat tilted at an angle that suggested confidence backed by force. Blackwood's foreman carried himself with the particular swagger of a man who had never faced consequences for his actions, Miss McAllister. He touched his hat brim with mock courtesy. Heard you found yourself some help. Sarah emerged from the house, wiping flour from her hands. Zeke appeared in the doorway behind her, close enough to intervene, but far enough to let her handle it first. Mr. Morrison. Her voice carried no warmth. What brings you out this way? Mr. Blackwood wanted me to remind you about your husband's debt. Time's getting short. Morrison's gaze lingered on the new construction with deliberate assessment. Shame to see you putting so much work into something that won't be yours much longer. Little Wolf had vanished at the first sound of hoofbeats. Smart boy, old enough to recognize danger in the shape of a man on horseback. The debt will be paid when it's due. Will it now? Morrison's smile held no humor. With what? This dirt farm won't bring in enough to feed a family, let alone pay $500. Zeke stepped forward, his movement casual but weighted with intent. Lady says the debt will be paid. Seems clear enough to me. Morrison's attention shifted, sizing up this new element in an equation he thought he understood. You the husband she sent for? I'm the carpenter she hired. Zeke's hands hung loose at his sides. Here to work. Nothing more complicated than that. Carpenter, Morrison repeated the word with amusement. Well, carpenter, you might want to know what kind of woman you're working for. Mixed blood. Got herself a half-breed child and no legal husband to claim either of them. The insult hung in the air between them, waiting for someone to pick it up and make it into something larger. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. Zeke's voice stayed level. I can see what kind of woman she is. Hardworking, honest, trying to make a life for her family. He paused. What kind of man comes onto someone else's land to make threats against a widow and her child? Morrison's hand moved toward his gun. Belt stopped, 2 against 1, and the carpenter looked capable of more than building houses. 6 weeks, Miss McAllister. Then this land goes on the auction block. He wheeled his horse around. Might want to spend that time packing instead of building. They watched him ride away until he was a dust devil on the horizon. Little Wolf emerged from wherever he had hidden, his face carefully blank. He'll be back, Sarah said. Yes, he will. Zeke picked up his hammer. Best get this finished before he does. That night, Sarah told them about the poker game. How McAllister had accused Blackwood of dealing seconds. How Blackwood had challenged him to prove it, knowing a poor rancher couldn't afford to make enemies of powerful men. How her husband had died of a heart attack 2 days after signing the note, the stress of the debt eating him alive from the inside. The game was rigged, she said. I know it. McAllister knew it, but knowing and proving are different things. They sat around the fire, each lost in their own thoughts. The desert night pressed close around them, vast and indifferent. Somewhere in that darkness, predators hunted prey that had grown careless or weak. Zeke added another stick to the flames. Then we'll have to find another way. Little Wolf spoke into the silence, his voice careful with the weight of adult concerns carried by young shoulders. What if we can't? Sarah reached over and touched her son's hand. Then we'll face whatever comes together. The fire burned lower, throwing their shadows long across the dirt floor of their rebuilt home. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain that might or might not come. They banked the coals and retreated to their separate rooms, but sleep came slowly for all of them. The house held against the wind. Solid walls, tight joints, foundation set deep enough to weather whatever storms were coming. It was a start. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. The fourth week brought sabotage in the night. They woke to find their water source poisoned with dead rabbits, the carcasses bloated and rank. The few cattle they had managed to gather were scattered to the four winds, their makeshift corral torn apart by more than animal panic. Zeke examined the torn fence posts, clean cuts where there should have been splinters, boot prints in the mud that belonged to no one who lived. "Here, Morrison's work," Sarah said, her voice flat with exhaustion. They spent the morning hauling water from a spring 2 miles away, enough to survive but not enough to thrive. Little Wolf helped without complaint, his small frame bent under the weight of buckets that seemed too large for his hands. By afternoon, they had repaired the corral and rounded up most of the scattered cattle. The animals were skittish now, alert to dangers that could come from any direction. They knew what the humans were learning. Safety was temporary, and peace was something you fought for daily. That evening, Zeke rode into town for supplies. The general store held conversations that stopped when he entered, resumed when he left. He moved through the aisles collecting nails and flour, coffee and ammunition, listening to the whispers that followed him. Outside the saloon, he heard Blackwood's voice carrying through the bat-wing doors. The cattle baron was holding court, his words thick with whiskey and certainty. Railroads coming through next year. Smart men are positioning themselves now, buying up the best land before the prices rise. Blackwood's laugh was harsh as winter. Wind. Course, some folks are too stubborn to see opportunity when it's staring them in the face. Another voice, younger and eager. To please, what about the McAllister place? Good water, decent grazing. That particular problem will solve itself soon enough. $500 is a lot of money for a widow woman to find. Blackwood's tone carried the satisfaction of a man who believed he controlled all the variables, especially when her land sits right on top of the richest silver vein in the territory. Zeke went still. The conversation continued, but he heard nothing after that word. Silver. The debt wasn't about cards or pride or even the railroad. It was about mineral rights that would make someone rich beyond imagining. He finished his purchases and rode home through darkness that felt heavier than before. The weight of knowledge pressed down on him, changing the shape of everything he thought he understood. Sarah was waiting when he returned, her face drawn with worry that went beyond his late arrival. She helped him carry the supplies inside, her movements sharp with nervous energy. "My brother came by while you were gone. Brought news from the reservation." She set down a bag of flour with unnecessary force. About Little Wolf, about his father. Zeke stopped unpacking. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. McAllister wasn't his blood father. The words came out like stones dropped in still water. His real father is Blackwood. The truth hit Zeke with the force of a physical blow. Everything suddenly made sense. The intensity of Blackwood's pursuit, the personal nature of his hatred. The way Morrison had spoken about mixed blood and illegitimate children. Blackwood forced himself on me 7 years ago, before I married McAllister. Sarah's voice held no self-pity, only the hard acceptance of someone who had learned to carry unbearable weight. McAllister knew, married me anyway, claimed Little Wolf as his own. Does the boy know? No, and I pray he never has to. She moved to the window, staring out at the darkness where threats could be gathering. But now my brother says there are rumors on the reservation. People talking about the boy's real parentage. Zeke understood now why Blackwood was so desperate to drive them away. A territorial politician couldn't afford to have his violent past exposed, especially not when it involved a child who carried his features for anyone observant enough to notice. "There's something else you need to know." Zeke told her about the silver, about the railroad conversations, about the real reason Blackwood wanted her land. The debt was never about poker. It was about stealing what's rightfully yours. Sierra absorbed this information without visible reaction, another burden to add to the collection she already carried. So he gets rich either way. Takes the land for the debt, or takes it to hide his shame. She turned from the window. And we lose everything. Not everything. Zeke moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes. We know the truth now. That gives us power. What kind of power? The word of a half-breed woman against a cattle baron. She shook her head. You don't understand how the world works out here. Then maybe it's time to change how the world works. They stood facing each other in the lamplight, the space between them charged with possibility and danger. Sierra's hand moved to touch his arm, a gesture so brief, it might have been accidental. Why are you doing this? Really doing this? Her voice carried the weight of someone who had learned not to trust easy answers. You could walk away. Find yourself a simpler life. Zeke looked at her face, seeing the strength that had carried her through assault and abandonment, through marriage and widowhood, through the constant struggle to protect her child in a world that wanted to destroy them both. Maybe I'm tired of walking away. The admission hung between them, more intimate than any physical touch. Sierra's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie she had learned to expect from men who made promises. The boy needs a father who chose him, she said finally. Not one who was forced on him by circumstances. Then let me choose him. Let me choose both of you. Little Wolf appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mama, I heard voices. Sierra moved to him, smoothing his hair with gentle fingers. Just talking, little one. Go back to sleep. The boy looked between them, reading the tension in the air with the sensitivity of a child who had learned to watch for storms. Is someone coming to hurt us again? No, Zeke said, his voice carrying a certainty he didn't entirely feel. We won't let that happen. Little Wolf nodded and returned to his bed. They listened to his breathing settle back into sleep, each lost in their own thoughts about the future they were trying to build. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain. The house held steady against the gusts, its walls solid and its foundation deep. They had built something worth protecting. Now they would have to prove it was strong enough to survive the storms that were coming. Sierra banked the fire, her movements careful and precise. Zeke checked the locks on the doors, testing each one twice. They moved around each other in the small space, aware of proximity and possibility, of the choice that lay before them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Morrison would return with fresh threats. Blackwood would escalate his pressure. The debt would come due, and the truth would demand its price. But tonight, they were together under a roof they had built with their own hands. Tonight, they were still fighting. The 6th week arrived with Blackwood himself. He rode up at dawn with Morrison and 3 other men, their horses kicking dust. Clouds that hung in the still air. Behind them came Sheriff Donnelly, his badge catching the early light, his allegiance clear in the way he positioned himself at Blackwood's shoulder. Sierra emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Zeke appeared beside her, close enough to touch but careful not to. Little Wolf remained inside, watching through the window with eyes that had learned to recognize danger in the shape of mounted men. Miss McAllister. Blackwood's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to having his wishes treated as commands. I've come to collect what's owed. The note isn't due for 3 more days. The note is due when I say it's due. He gestured to the sheriff. Donnelly here has a court order. Failure to pay constitutes abandonment of property. Sign the deed. Transfer now, and you can walk away with whatever you can carry. Sierra's hand stilled on the apron. And if I refuse? Then the sheriff arrests you for theft of cattle. Seems some of our branded stock wandered onto your land. Blackwood's smile held no warmth. Amazing how cattle can find their way into other people's corrals. Morrison chuckled, the sound ugly in the morning quiet. The other men shifted in their saddles, hands resting near their guns with casual threat. Zeke stepped forward. Interesting how those cattle showed up right after your men tore down our fences. Careful, Carpenter. Blackwood's attention shifted to him with predatory focus. Making accusations against upstanding citizens can be dangerous for a man's health. So can stealing land from widows and children. The words hung in the air between them, sharp as broken glass. Morrison's hand moved toward his gun. The other men tensed, waiting for the signal that would turn conversation into violence. Then hoofbeats approached from the east. A dozen riders emerged from the morning haze, their horses moving with the fluid grace of people born to the saddle. Sierra's Apache relatives had arrived, led by her brother Joseph, their faces painted for war, but their weapons still holstered. Blackwood's men shifted nervously. The odds had suddenly changed, and everyone knew it. Sierra, Joseph's voice carried the authority of a war chief who had earned his position through courage rather than politics. We came as soon as we heard. Behind the Apache riders, more dust clouds appeared. Townspeople from Promise Creek, their faces grim with purpose. The banker, Henry Morrison. The preacher, Samuel Wright. Even old Doc Patterson, carrying his medical bag and his legendary stubbornness in equal measure. Blackwood's confidence wavered as he realized he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. This was supposed to be simple intimidation, not a public confrontation with witnesses who couldn't be bought or threatened. "This is a private matter between myself and Miss McAllister," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Nothing private about stealing land," Doc Patterson called out. "Nothing private about terrorizing a widow and her child." The crowd murmured agreement. Blackwood had overplayed his hand, shown his true nature to people who had previously been willing to look the other way. "I have documentation of the debt," Blackwood insisted. "Legal documentation signed by her husband." "You have documentation of a rigged poker game," Zeke said, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "Just like you have documentation for a railroad deal that was supposed to pay fair market value for land you planned to steal for silver mining." Blackwood went rigid. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know you've been lying to everyone. The railroad executives, the townspeople, the territorial government." Zeke pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket. "I also know you've been very interested in keeping certain family secrets buried." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Blackwood's eyes flicked to little Wolf, still watching from the window, and his face went pale beneath his weathered tan. Sierra spoke into the silence, her voice clear and strong. 7 years ago, Cornelius Blackwood assaulted me. When I bore a child from that attack, James McAllister married me and claimed the boy as his own. Now Blackwood wants to steal our land to hide his shame and line his pockets." The accusation hit the crowd like a physical blow. Women gasped. Men muttered curses. Sheriff Donnelly actually stepped away from Blackwood, his loyalty evaporating in the face of public outrage. "She's lying," Blackwood sputtered. "You can't believe the word of a half-breed woman against a pillar of the community." "I can believe the evidence of my own eyes," Doc Patterson said. "That boy has your chin, Blackwood. Your nose. Anyone with sense can see the resemblance." More hoofbeats approached from the west. A single rider this time, well-dressed and carrying himself with the bearing of authority. The railroad executive, Thomas Fitzgerald, arrived with perfect timing and a briefcase full of documents. "Mr. Blackwood," Fitzgerald called out as he dismounted, "I've been looking for you. Seems there are some discrepancies in your land acquisition reports." Blackwood's world was collapsing around him, brick by carefully laid brick. His men began edging their horses away, sensing which way the wind was blowing. The railroad is prepared to pay Miss McAllister fair market value for her mineral rights, Fitzgerald continued. Assuming she's interested in selling, of course. Sierra looked at little Wolf, still framed in the window. Her son's future stretched before them, bright with possibility instead of shadowed by shame. I'm interested in hearing your offer, she said. The negotiation took place on the porch of the house they had rebuilt together. Fair compensation for silver rights that would make Sierra independently wealthy. A contract for Zeke's construction company to build railroad bridges across the territory. Legal adoption papers that would make Little Wolf officially a McAllister Thornfield, with all the protection that name would provide. Blackwood tried to slink away during the paperwork, but Sheriff Donnelly stopped him. The real sheriff not. The corrupt puppet Blackwood had been bribing. Donnelly had arrived with Fitzgerald, carrying warrants for fraud, assault, and attempted theft. The crowd dispersed as the sun reached its zenith, satisfied that justice had been served. Sarah's Apache relatives departed with promises to return for the wedding. The townspeople returned to their businesses, their consciences clear and their faith in decent behavior restored. Evening found the three of them sitting on their porch, watching the sun paint the mountains purple and gold. Little Wolf sat between Zeke and Sierra, whittling a piece of wood with the knife his new father had given him. Will you teach me to build houses? The boy asked, his voice serious with 8-year-old responsibility. I'll teach you everything I know, Zeke promised. Houses, bridges, anything you want to learn. Sierra reached across her son to touch Zeke's hand. Thank you for staying, for choosing us. Thank you for letting me. The desert wind carried the scent of rain approaching from the west. Their rebuilt home stood solid against the gathering. Dusk, its walls strong enough to weather whatever storms might come. They had found what they hadn't known they were looking for. A family forged in fire, tempered by hardship, and made stronger by the choice to stand together. Little Wolf held up his carving, a small wooden horse with careful details and patient craftsmanship. For the baby, he said. When it comes. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her still flat belly, where new life was already beginning to grow. The future stretched before them, wide as the desert sky and full of promise. They sat together as stars appeared overhead, 3 people who had learned that home was not a place you found, but something you built with your own hands, one careful choice at a time. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.